Well, thank you very much for having invited me. And in some ways, what I'm going to say follow up very nicely from what Laure was saying, because both of us, we've been involved through different disciplinaries kind of perspectives in urban studies, and we've studied Gulf cities. So the theme of this wonderful gathering, and I have to really thank the organizers for this invitation, is that of urban semiotics. So how cities and urban environments communicate meaning through sign and symbol present in their environment, built, social, and so forth. Now, with this talk, I want to pick your brain, because this has been really something that has been engaging me for a number of years now. And I want to pose at the beginning the following question to you, but then I'm going to try to unpack it. I can also explain to you a bit about my research. Now, where is oil? And oil signs and symbols in the cities of the Gulf, past and present. And is there an urban semiotics of oil? And the kind of idea of visibility and invisibility of oil as an industry and as a substance is really caught on in my imagination as an urban historian. So what I want to first of all start with, I want to tell you a bit about my long-standing involvement with Gulf cities, but also as a very site-specific practice, but not as an artist, but as an academic, as an historian of this region. I work primarily on the 19th and 20th century. Although I have more and more worked on visual culture and with artists since I moved to Abu Dhabi 7 years ago. So I started off in the mid-1990s, and I was very interested in urbanism and in urban histories, and I was very interested in this region. And in some ways, at the time, the work that started developing at the time on Gulf City, and there were very little work done on Gulf cities. I remember coming here in 1996 in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and your pictures of earlier Abu Dhabi remind me a bit, sort of my memories of that first trip. So, I was very much influenced in the literature, historical literature, but in general, humanities and social science literature. In the 1990s was the spatial turn. So space became very important to analyze anything. And so as an urban historian, my earlier work was really, really on space and the ways in which port cities in this region, and particularly Manama and Bahrain and Kuwait City, which are the cities that I studied the most, kind of their spatial development from the 19th century to the oil era reflected different type of issues, politics, society, international trade, and so forth. So I focused a lot on port and the transformation of ports as commercial spaces in relation to the city. Then I started getting really interested in violence. And so I had a big project on urban violence, violence in cities, right? And somehow in parallel, I got really interested with oil, because coming to a place like this, here, I'm not just saying Dubai or Abu Dhabi, but the whole region, you cannot avoid thinking about oil, particularly as an historian. And so I started working on cities and violence, but from an oil perspective. So, what did oil create? How did oil produce violence in cities? And I mean, my case studies was Iraq, was Kirkuk, for a number of reasons, the capital of the early oil industry in Iraq and whatever. So, and with this idea of oil and violence, and this was really a very, very big international project. It was 10 of us working. It was specific on the Middle East, but not just on the Gulf. It was all over the Middle East. We had case studies. I started thinking about the powers of oil. What are the powers of this black substance, right? And then I started getting really, really kind of looking into sort of the ways in which cultural studies people, and particularly people involved in literature, I started looking at the power of oil as a substance, at the so-called oil magic. And so I started basically thinking about the powers of oil in an urban context and in relation to the cities of the Gulf, and particularly those cities that had basically witnessed from the 1950s onwards, started with Manama and Bahrain, then Kuwait in the 1960s, Baghdad in the 70s, and then of course we have all the oil booms in the UAE, Qatar later on, and so forth. So, so since I got here, I mean, I've been working, and this is my latest edited volume, which I edited with Mandana Limbert, a colleague from New York. My interest has been very much with this idea of visibility and invisibility of oil. Where is oil? Can we see it or can't we see it? And so forth. Particularly with relation to urban life and the ways in which people have lived in these cities since the discovery of oil, which happened at different times, as I've explained, throughout the region. So it's earlier in certain places and later in other. So, and this is an edited volume, actually, that in some ways where we look at the visibility and invisibility of oil, but also we relate it to the whole idea of experience. Experience, everyday experience, experience in very many different ways. I can talk a bit about the book later on if you want to know more. And this has been a collaboration between historians and anthropologists, because we do share, I feel I do share with anthropologists this kind of more kind of cultural visual turn in my research, and I've always felt that. So the whole idea about this volume, which is about the Middle East as a whole, not just the Gulf, I mean, I have actually a piece on corporate photography and the oil industry in the Arab world, where I look at the ways in which companies represented workers, indigenous workers, local workers, Arab and other workers in the 1950s and in the 1960s. So, and actually, by the way, this came out of a conference that was very generously sponsored by the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute. And we have here the current director, Maurice Pomeranz. Thank you very much for all the help the Institute has given me. So, let me just, well, okay, so since 2017, I've lived in the UAE. Undoubtedly, we can't really deny it, a world of urban spectacles, of glitzy images, hyperbolic architectural projects, which are, many have argued, dominated by a particular type of aesthetics, which is an aesthetics of luxury. Fahama, right? Oil, in all this, as a substance and industry, is not always in plain sight. Unless, of course, you go to areas of gold production. But, you know, in this part of the world, and in general in the Middle East, and not only in the Gulf, areas of oil production are quite far from cities and inhabited areas. So, the French theorist and philosopher Guy Debord tell us that in a consumerist society characterized by the prevalence of modern or hypermodern modes of consumption, and we are all living in this type of world, life becomes an immense accumulation of spectacles. So I feel sometimes that my life has become as such, and that's why I'm so interested in, this spectacle in relation to oil. So, of course, since oil development throughout the region in the second part of the 20th century, and particularly in the small Arab states of the Gulf, UAE, but also Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, as I said before, the hypervisibility of the oil economy has coupled petroleum general invisibility in everyday life. So many people they have never really experienced oil, at least directly. Particularly, that kind of visibility of oil as a substance, of crude as a substance, because of course we feed ourselves with oil derivatives, with all our life is permeated by oil, the materials and so forth, but we don't know crude. We don't know what, we've never really touched oil. So, so the idea of the urban spectacle is not a new idea. Because actually, and this is part of my work, from the 1950s, the urban spectacle, the idea of the city, beautiful and hyper-modern, was popularized and publicized by all the oil companies which controlled oil production throughout the region. And that's what I'm really working on, the visual culture produced by this company and then adopted by governments from Iraq to Kuwait. I'm not actually working on the UAE because it's too late for me. I'm stopping at the 1973 oil crisis. So the kind of powers of oil suggest some sort of ambiguity of oil influence, effects, and affects, this whole idea of oil magic. That's what two very important philosophers of oil, Vaden and Salminian, have called the distancing effect of oil, its ability to induce intimacy and proximity, but also distance. Its ability to make society incredibly affluent and wealthy, but also its ability to provoke wars and disasters of every kind, from natural disasters to other type of disasters. Now, I wanted to show you this image, which is this is an exhibit from Qasr al-Hosn in Abu Dhabi, from the museum of the Qasr. And this is a bottle of crude oil. And I want with this to highlight the general historical invisibility of oil in the Gulf. And I'm going to read the caption of Bottle of Crude Oil. Sheikh Salama bin Butti followed early oil exploration very closely. One account relates that she took a bottle of crude oil to her son, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan al-Nahyan, in Alain, so that he could know what it looked like. Despite the fact that the world relies on it, most people have never seen oil for themselves. So this is the idea of the visibility of oil, right? Which now, if you compare this with this is the very famous monument in Baku, Azerbaijan, called the Parachute Tower, right? Now, I visited Baku last year, and in the city, oil seems to be everywhere, embedded in the history, in the infrastructure of the city. So this tower is a construction of 75 meters high, located at the very center of Baku Boulevard, and which was built in the form of an oil derrick to celebrate the oil industry. So this is heritage, right? This is heritage. It was opened, though, in 1936, and this tells you that oil industry in Baku goes back to the middle of the 19th century. So just to say that there are particular visibilities in cities like this that we don't see as yet here. We don't even see it in places like Kirkuk or Manama in Bahrain, where oil was discovered very earlier on, at least in comparison to here. Now, well, of course, but perhaps oil presence in urban life can be located in the effects of mobility and automobility. And this is something that I'm very interested in, the development of mobility and automobility in cities throughout the region. Cars, of course, having been the primary mechanical objects moved by oil, and of course, illustrated one of what is considered to be one of oil's historical powers, that is to accelerate life and the processes of modernization, inspiring what many have called revolutions of speed. Which also brings me to what many have called the history of oil's materials culture. And in some ways, this is quite connected to the urban nostalgia that Laura was discussing, this kind of urban culture of memory, which is very materially defined things. And that's why I'm very interested. I'm interested, as in cars, and this is a photo actually from Manama in Bahrain in 1951, so you can see already the car spree. I'm also interested in this whole history of everyday objects linked to the development of the oil industry, such as cars, but also refrigerator, electric fans, fridges, and how they affected household economies and urban and household life, and even the shape of the household, and so forth. Now, the life of these objects that belong to an early oil development, you know, if you think about the fans, the earlier refrigerators, cars like this and so forth, in a sense, they have disappeared from the life of oil cities as historical objects. Because of course now we have hyper-modern air conditioning, we've got all sorts of new commodities and so forth. In some ways, what I'm very interested in the construction of a particular type of material cultures of heritage linked to oil. But in some ways, these objects are resurfacing in some cities. And here, and I'll conclude now, I have a number of images from the Qatar National Museum. And these are displays. I mean, the museum is a very beautiful museum. And of course, they are basically celebrating, this is a room that's celebrating the early oil industry, early oil development. And you see the car, spare parts, bicycles, TV sets, and whatever. It's actually quite a beautiful display. Also, this. So typewriters, clocks, telephones, fans, and so forth, which are nicely displayed in the museum. Also, you have, and this is again from the Qatar National Museum, this is a beautiful installation with some cinematic effects of the first oil pipes in the Jabal Dukhan, which is the historical place where oil was discovered in Qatar. And Qatar has quite a long history in the oil industry. And this is, for me, this is one of the ultimate oil spectacles, the ways in which the whole installation is set. And if you go, I mean, you just have a look at it because it's very good. So this is a case, a bit of Baku. The oil industry somehow is turning into heritage, but not really. This is a Qatar thing. So even in places like Bahrain and Kuwait, I mean, and Iraq, for other reasons, you don't have this heritage tradition as linked to the oil industry. Qatar is doing. So I'll just stop here and thank you very much.
Thank you for your amazing talk. Questions? Sure.
So tell me where you see oil. Give me some new ideas.
I don't know about new ideas, but I can tell you somewhere where I saw oil, and it was really interesting. I was just wondering, do you think the visibility of oil is maybe related to the perceived maturity of a nation or how they see themselves? Because what I remembered looking at your photographs was, I'm not sure if you went to Expo, but I think it was either the Kuwaiti or the Bahraini pavilion had like a centerpiece that was, you know, this is how much oil we pump out in a second, and it would come up. But the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan, you know, other oil countries didn't have that sort of celebration of their heritage. They were promoting the environment or, you know, their cultural features. And is it a maturity thing? Is it just branding?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's about, I mean, most of what I was getting to is this whole notion of nation building and the place occupied by oil, the industry, in the formation of national cultures, right? The issue is also, the expo, it was interesting actually, but oil is always represented or presented as technicalism, as numbers, as production, is technicalism, is not as yet entered the cultural sphere. As in Azerbaijan, if you go to Baku, it's quite amazing, you know, but also, of course, it's a longer history of involvement with oil, also from even the pre-modern period and so forth. So, but yes, but it's a difficult question, and it's a question I'm grappling with. I'm not just interested in heritage as such, but yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you.
I'm not very familiar with it. Isn't the black color of the flag, does it have something to do with the oil?
Which flag?
The flag of Emirates.
I have no idea. If anybody can tell me, it will be great. I think, I mean, probably is a tribal flag, is a tribal color, but I don't know. Ah, sorry.
Yeah.
Probably.
For our listeners.
I have no idea, but I mean, my understanding, I don't know about the flag, but the Emirates, but thinking about Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, the flags are the old tribal flags of the leading tribes that they've been repurposed. I mean, but I have no idea about here. Perhaps I'll have a look into that.
Question? Okay.
Hello. I think I have a comment rather than a question because this topic is a bit familiar to me. We've been working in the oil region of Russia and Tatarstan. It was mentioned in recent talks. And this is where the oil is visible because people live like it used to be the cluster of villages, and then the technology came and the industry came, but the villages have left, and people still live surrounded by the oil industry. And that's really amazing that I've never divided this kind of locations, landscapes, into the visible and invisible. My thinking was always that the oil is something that we know what is it, especially like being from Russia.
Yeah.
But apparently, like what I would say we even don't know the genesis of oil. There are a few theories, right, that is it organic or maybe cosmic, or like what oil is. So the magic of it is that we know so little but producing so much. And yeah, thank you for this topic, because for the visual culture, for arts, it's just a source of inspiration, and I think it's like a lot of concepts could be raised by this question. Like, yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And that's exactly what I meant. Some populations have lived for centuries and millennia with the bitumen coming up, and Kurdistan, in Azerbaijan, and whatever. So crude was something they were familiar with even before the oil industry, before in the modern time. But it's so interesting because in the edited volume, there is an article by a former PhD student of mine who's now an academic in the US. She's Kuwaiti. And she's worked on Kuwait City and the oil industry. And you know, she says in this article, the first time we Kuwaitis experienced oil as a substance was during the Iraq invasion, where all the oil wells were blown up. And so, you know, people were breathing fumes, their lungs were full of, oil substances, and their skins were black and whatever. So that was the first time.
We have a last question. In terms of the presence of oil, and like I agree with you, when you're in Baku, it's fantastic. You actually see, as you're driving from the airport, you see like it's being pumped. But do you think the reason we don't really see it, especially in Dubai, the reason is reflected in kind of strategy of moving away from oil and rather move to sustainable energy, to move to, I don't know, collaboration, like building financial hubs, building tourist hubs, when, from what I see in Azerbaijan, for example, there is not that much of that strategy. Oil remains the prime kind of source of income for the country, right? I mean, Saudi on this side, I think is an interesting example, because, for example, they have a museum called Museum of Black Gold, which is a contemporary art museum.
It's the new one, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Which is kind of owning the fact that it's, you know, that all this art is bought because of oil, but yet it's also not very present in the visuals.
I think with Dubai, the issue for me, I mean, and I always think as a historian, I'm sorry, Dubai has always been far away from oil, physically, because oil is not here. Oil is in Abu Dhabi. So there is a kind of physical geographical distance, but also there is the kind of urban tradition that Dubai has developed in the oil era, which was a continuation of a mercantile tradition of the pre-oil era, because Dubai was a very important port in the region even before oil came. So I see it a bit like that, but also in Abu Dhabi, the oil fields are very far away from the city. So it's in general in all this region, also in Saudi or in Bahrain or in Kuwait. It's a kind of a frontier extractivism, they call it, because the actual sites are very far away. They are in what were historically inhospitable regions in the desert or so.